Iva Davies, Icehouse, welcome to noise11.com. And, well, we're reactivated again down in Victoria. We had a brief moment where we saw you down here a few months ago, and at least you're getting back out on the road again.
The thing is, there's a touring party of around about 24 people, and most of those people come from Melbourne. And that's been a source of great difficulty for us because I'll give you an example of a show we did in March, we were doing a series of shows on beaches, and we did Cronulla Beach in Sydney, and that was fine, except it was weird because the whole audience had to sit down in spaced chairs and not move. So that was odd. And then I think we were due to play on Glenelg Beach in Adelaide. So once again, the crew were all in Melbourne, I'm in Sydney. And then there was an outbreak in Melbourne. And the afternoon before the day when everybody was due to fly to Adelaide, the Premier of South Australia said, right, we're shutting the border at midnight. And so we all went into a complete panic. And I thought, that's it, the show is gone because none of us can travel, to South Australia. Until about 9:30 at night, and Larry, our Melbourne-based tour manager, been working together since 1986, and he rang me and said, it's all happening. The promoters hired a Learjet. I've got everybody to pack their bags. We're meeting at the airport in Melbourne, and they flew over the South Australian border at 11 o'clock that night and got in by an hour, basically. So we had close calls like that for a number of shows. Our tour manager stayed behind a day longer in Perth to tidy up all the loose ends and then got locked down for 14 days. He couldn't get back home.
These are all the things that are going to go in our COVID books when we write them 10 years from now.
Yes, indeed. Anyway, been working with the same crew for 10 years, and some of these band members, as you would know, go back 35, 36 years. Most of them based out of Melbourne, and our tour manager said before the last set of shows, these guys haven't worked for 344 days. So they're all working, sound technicians, lighting designers, lighting operators, all that sort of thing. They're working all the time. We're only the tip of the iceberg. They're doing international tours. None of that's been happening, nothing. And I really am too afraid to ask the question, how are you actually getting by? Because none of them are qualified for any of the JobKeeper support, none of that stuff, because they're all subcontractors. They're all running their own companies, I guess is how you'd put it. And they sort of fell right between the cracks. So I'm getting texts now from them saying, can't wait for this Queensland show. It's been so long, and they're really revved up.
I think, look, I've lost count of the number of Icehouse shows I've seen over the decades. Going back to the 80s, when I was working at 2WL Wollongong, and all those Shellharbour Workers Club shows that amaze me. You've always given the audience what they want in a set list. I think it's been, 10 or 12 years since you've reactivated Icehouse again now, and it still gets me every time I go to a show, most recently in St Kilda, just not long ago, the amount of care you put into the curation of your set list.
That particular show was quite an eye-opener for me because, the context of it was the St Kilda Festival approached us and said, it's your 40th, there's the 40th anniversary of the Flowers album, the very first album. And it's the 40th anniversary of the St Kilda Festival. And we'd like you to play, but we'd like you to play as you would have played 40 years ago, because we played the very first St Kilda Festival. And so it meant that I had to go back and go through a whole set of songs, some of which I haven't played for 40 years. And a number of the band members had never played them. And their songs like Skin and one in particular I think was a real eye-opener for a lot of people was a song called Not My Kind. And that was a very late edition song to the Flowers album. I wrote that virtually in the studio, well, I finished it virtually in the studio as we're recording the Flowers album. And it turned out to be a very powerful song I had kind of completely forgotten about. It's obviously about serious alienation, but I think that most telling line is the last line. The title of the song you don't hear until the very last line of the song, and it goes, he's just another boy, she's just another girl, and they're not my kind. And I thought, wow, I wrote that when I was 23 or 24. And I felt like that too. It was quite strange revisiting that stuff.
Are you tempted to go back into the other albums and drill down? Because the set list is really about giving the audience what they know. What about your personal favourites on the albums? I would imagine that your taste in your own music must differ somewhat from the average fan.
It does, and the other factor that goes into kind of picking a set list is that there are some things that were big hits on record that just don't work so well as live songs, and vice versa. So, for example, every now and again we'll haul out a massively long sort of 8-minute version of Cross the Border, which was not an extraordinarily successful song. It was probably more successful overseas than it was here. But it's great fun to play. It's just this sort of epic version with multiple guitar solos, and Paul Gilday and I have a very fun time playing it. So it works because it's a good live song. And sometimes it's taken preference over, something that was a high charting single, which might not work so well as a live song. In terms of straying into some of the kind of really obscure areas, I guess the album tracks, it's quite, it becomes quite daunting because some of them we've never played, some of them we haven't played for 40 years. And I read with interest, somebody alerted me, because I don't have any social media at all, quite deliberately. But somebody alerted me to the fact that Brian Eno has just been commenting on Twitter about a song called Angel Street. And Angel Street was on Measure for Measure. It was never a single. And there's Brian Eno, who being a fan of it. And I was just blown away. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe we should be playing that. I've always had a soft spot for it. But that kind of blew me away. And it reminded me too of that kind of key line that Bowie said to me when we just sort of met up for the first time before about to do that tour with him. And he said, you never know who will be listening, because he heard us on the radio in Europe. We had a hit with Hey Little Girl, and David Bowie was listening, and so was Peter Gabriel. And I actually had to choose between going on tour with Peter Gabriel or going on tour with David Bowie at his absolute height. It was a terrible decision to have to make. But anyway, we know which one I chose. And my son is sort of verbally kicks me every now and again and said, Dad, you should have gone with Gabriel. Anyway, so I guess it's a long way of going. It's very hard to know what people want to hear or what will be interesting to play. It gets tricky.
I guess the short answer to the Bowie versus Gabriel is that you still do have an opportunity to one day do the Peter Gabriel tour if he ever does one.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I've introduced both my children to those wonderful Peter Gabriel albums. And I still, he set benchmarks, as did other songwriters, that I would never, targets that I never hit, in however many songs it is that I've written, hundreds of songs. But, I still come back to something like the song Biko and go, there's a song that kind of had incredible gravitas and importance, and it's so simple. And yet, it's a powerful song about a political message. And I tried on occasion to kind of get into that sort of thing and kind of really fell flat on my face, I think. So, yes, I'm still jealous of Peter Gabriel and his songwriting.
With David Bowie, you pay homage to David with the Gene Genie. And I guess, going way back to the 70s when Icehouse first started, or as Flowers, when you first started, you were doing a lot of covers then. Was Bowie somebody that you were covering a lot of back then?
We did a lot of Bowie covers. Well, actually, no, they were from obscure. I mean, we were playing tracks from Low, which, as you know, is a kind of strange experimental album. I think the weirdest stuff that we did, and I know that a lot of people wouldn't have known this material, and perhaps some of them, the audience that Flowers had, thought that our original songs were a lot of covers that we did from the first three, at least, early Brian Eno albums. And, they would be classed as relatively obscure. But I've gone back now quite recently. We have a connection, actually, because you're probably aware that Brian Eno actually did some work with us on the fourth album, and I've stood in a studio next to him singing into backing vocals into a microphone, which is quite extraordinary. But he's currently managed by Flower's original manager. And so there's a weird kind of, you know, sort of transcontinental relationship with Brian Eno. But I've recently gone back and actually been playing some of those early albums and really discovering why it was that I picked those for Flowers to play. They're such interesting creations. I don't know how you describe them really. They're quite wacky, but wonderful. So we did, you know, we did stuff from all over the place. We played a whole bunch of Easy Beat songs. We played a bunch of Loved Ones songs. In fact, I'm quite convinced that In Excess heard the version that we were doing of The Loved One, and that's what inspired them to record it. We were doing things that were contemporary, you know, Sex Pistols and Elvis Costello. We were doing stuff that went right back, you know, the Kinks, the Trogs, believe it or not. We had a massive sort of repertoire in those days. So all of those things, somebody recently asked me, you know, pick a decade of music. And I've been watching a series called 1971, and it's just about the year 1971. I was doing my HSC in that year, but extraordinary music coming, extraordinary things happening in the world. So I picked the 70s and I said, that's where all my roots are. They're all, you know, embedded in Pink Floyd and Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and that whole thing, you know, as well as Led Zeppelin and, you know, other obvious things. It was an extraordinary kind of, what's the word, how to describe it, kind of, yeah, extraordinary musical environment for me to kind of get my first electric guitar in, really. That was, you know, all this stuff going on and stuff that had just been going on. And I was kind of drinking it in, this massive stuff that became the influences on those first songs.
You're still doing, you know, Bowie and the Set List, the Gene Genie, Sex Pistols that you just named there. And I guess, you know, both you and I have more years behind us than we have in front of us. You must obviously think about your heritage and how that is going to evolve in the years gone by. I'm thinking of two pieces of work, the Dub House and also Meltdown, where you've given creative license to other artists to go in there and reinvent what you created many years ago. Is that, you know, part of the plan in moving forward for Icehouse?
Look, the Meltdown album was an interesting experiment, and I'm not sure whether it was entirely successful, but it was interesting, and that's the kind of point. I suppose I'm starting to sound at this point like Brian Eno, you know, do anything you like, not everybody will like it, as long as it's interesting, you know. My mother was a quite well-recognised painter, and she said to me, as long as people react to what you've painted, it doesn't matter if it's a bad reaction, but the worst thing is if they don't react at all. So I kind of put Meltdown, that sort of remix album, in that category of, you might not like all of this, but it's really, really interesting. Dub House was a kind of strange one that I got in a lot of trouble for, actually, because a lot of people were kind of completely confused by the concept of us doing, you know, a whole line of our big hit songs as reggae songs. But it went back, for me, it was quite a sort of personal thing to do. And we only did 2 shows. We sort of did it as a kind of Christmas party, one in Melbourne at the Esplanade Hotel, and one in Paddington, Sydney, at the Oxford Arts Factory. So that was kind of a one-off, and we happened to record one of them. But it was just such good fun, you know. And I remember we did, where it came out of was that we did a number of occasions we did these big summer tours in Europe, and when the sun comes out and it's summer in Europe, there were just live music festivals everywhere because everybody's so pleased that it's warm and they can get outside. And they were the weirdest lineups. And we were in Germany, and I was standing side stage, and Peter Tosh was playing, and he had a massive band and backing singers, and you know there must have been 12 people on stage. And at some point I was standing next to Guy Pratt, our bass player. And I sort of was watching this guy right at the back of the stage, and we'd been hammered, you know, we were working so hard that we were fried, both of, you know, the whole band, we were just kind of worked off our feet. And so I was feeling the pressure, and and having to do lots of press and stuff. And there was a guy at the back, and he was probably off his face, and he was just going chukka, 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 the whole of the set. You know, that's all he did. And I said to Guy, I want to be that bloke there doing the chukka man. And that was the entire kind of a nugget of the kernel of where Dubhouse came from, was I want to be that guy and just do be the reggae back to stop, basically. So it was good fun, but a lot of people kind of went, you know, well, Keith Welsh, I don't think is a particular fan of Dubhouse, and he's managing us. So there you go. But you got to try these experiments, I suppose.
Since Icehouse reactivated, there's been no new music. Why?
Why? I wrote, there is an entire unreleased album. I'm probably not meant to tell you this. I've actually just been reworking my will with a whole bunch of lawyers, and I've specified that that's not going to be released until my demise. And whatever time is in between then, I can't imagine at this point me going back and writing, because I put a lot of blood into that album. And I believe it's probably the best album, best set of songs I ever wrote. So it's kind of I've made a really strange bar too high for myself in a kind of weird way. And then on the other hand, you know, I was here late one night, not that long ago, and I went, oh, and I was hearing something, and I went downstairs, which is, you know, down a bunch of stairs and through a very big room to the grand piano that I've got. And I took my phone with me, and then I recorded this little sketch. Not that I'm a very good pianist, but it was enough to just kind of make a note that I could remember. And I've still got it on my phone, and every now and again I'll play it and go, you know what, should finish that. It's, you know, really something. So I don't know. It's quite haphazard with me. I think you probably recognise by now that I'm not, unfortunately, somebody like Paul Kelly or Neil Finn, who I'm intensely jealous of, these guys that just write constantly. I can't do that. I've never been able to do that. I have to make a block of time. I generally have to have a deadline that's kind of thrust on me by somebody else. And so back in the day, I had this contract with these clauses that said, you will deliver this by this date, you know, that's it. And so they were my brick wall deadlines. And that's probably the only reason I really wrote those songs, because I don't need to do it as a personal therapy. So in a way, that's a great disadvantage, because it's like anything else too. I guess the more you do it, the better practiced you get. You know, the better at it you get. So I can't really answer that question by promising you there's going to be a bunch of songs anytime in the near future.
So when was the last time you had one of those songwriting blocks?
I've had this conversation with my son too, because he's kind of at that age where he's attempting to write things, and it's not easy. And you can make it impossible for yourself, I think. But if somebody was to come to me tomorrow, and I know this for a fact because it happened a number of years ago, that somebody came to me with a commission and said, here's the brief, we need a song, and, you know, here's the money that's going to make it worth your while. Well, it was. And so I'd sat down and I pumped out a song, which I'm quite proud of. And nobody will ever hear it because it was used in the opening ceremony of the 15th Asian Games in Doha. And, you know, it was one of those kind of, here's the cash, you'll never get any royalties from this, complete buyout, with a very strict brief, because I got sent a wad of material that thick of, this is the cultural history of Doha and Qatar. You know, this is what the people are, and this is, you know, the history, and we want this and we want that all in this song. But, you know, it was certainly like riding a bike again. I just got back on that bike and went, right, okay, here's a challenge, and off I went. So I know that if somebody gives me that, this is what you have to do for this reason, I can do it. But if I'm just floating in space, as I am at the moment, I'm not really motivated to express myself through song.
Why Nothing Too Serious as the final track? Yeah, pretty much every show that I've seen over the last couple of years. That, again, it wasn't a song that was a particularly big hit back in its day, if it was even a single. I know it got played on radio at the time, but, you know, it's an interesting song to end a set with.
Look, it's just a hoot. It's just such fun. And it's also flat out enough that I think, you know, I can't speak for the rest of the band, but I'm on my kind of last legs by the time we get to that. And I don't think I would survive the set if we put it in the set. That'd be the end of me, you know, I'm done. So we come off after Nothing Too Serious, and then I kind of fall in a heap. It really is a kind of flat out song. But it's fun, you know, look, there are serious moments, as you know, in the set. There's generally, you know, a little kind of section of we're getting serious now. But one of the motivations for doing this is that it is fun. And it's fun just being in that collective of really good musicians and funny people. And Paul Gilday I've been playing with for 31 years, and he's a laugh. You know, they're all funny in their own way, and it's just an enjoyable occasion. I mean, we look forward to kind of just all swarming into, you know, the gig because we're living in different cities, and, you know, a drummer lives in Adelaide, and there are 3 players in Melbourne, and there's me up here in Sydney. So we don't get to hang out. You know, this is like when we do a gig, it's like, right, let's party. So it's good. It's got to be fun. You know, this is what I say. But you might be doing some serious music, but it does have to give you enjoyment. That's what it's for.
Well, Trip the Switch is the next Icehouse gig, July 3rd. James Reyne, Shannon Noll, Angels, Boom Crash Opera, Killing Heidi. Great lineup. Fantastic lineup. And I haven't seen the Angels for ages. And you probably know the history, but people generally don't, was at the time when the Angels and Cold Chisel were the 2 biggest bands in Australia by far. They broke away from the sort of agency, I guess, the booking agent that got them all the work. They broke away from them because that was a monopoly, that particular business. And they were, between the 2 of them, and there were probably a couple of 100 bands on the books of this agency, but between the Angels and Cold Chisel, they were actually doing more than half the business for this agency. They were that powerful and that popular. And yet they weren't getting a better deal than any of the other bands. And so they broke away with their managers, and those 2 formed a collective called Dirty Pool, and they got a 3rd young manager who was looking for a band, and we were the kind of band chosen to be the apprentices. So we did a lot of shows with the Angels and a lot of shows with Cold Chisel. And at a certain point when I was kind of homeless, I think it was probably after the first international tour that we did, I had to give up my flat here. And I actually went and lived in Rick Brewster's house for a number of weeks because they were away on tour. I had nowhere to stay. And in fact, I did a bit of work in his house on sketches that became songs on Primitive Man. So I actually wrote bits of Primitive Man in Rick Brewster's house. So here I owe him a lot. He loaned me a Vox wah pedal, which I was using on some footage that of a festival that we played in New Zealand, and I assimilated this Vox wah pedal into my working sound. He never got it back. Sorry, Rick. So I kind of kept that pedal. So great stuff there. Look forward to hopefully some more shows in Melbourne. But in the meantime, Queensland. Iva, thanks for joining us here at Noise 11.
Being absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.